Hey folks, this is Paul talking about A Course in Miracles. Thought I'd do a video today, see how it goes. I'm going to talk about guilt. Guilt and anger and the projection of guilt and what it does to your mind. Now, in A Course in Miracles, as I've been seeing recently, there's basically two states in which you can be. You can either be innocent or you can be guilty. And before the separation from God, everybody was knowing that they were completely innocent. Then there was the attack on God, the original sin, the idea of being able to cause God to change. And this produced guilt in the mind. So it sort of makes sense in an emotional sense, because you know that God is means everything to you and is perfect love and holy and pure, innocent and friendly and harmless. And then you seem to go do this thing where you seem to try to attack God, try to attack reality, and this attack is sin. The idea of attack is sin. And it's also part of insanity. So you actually think that you've done something that you couldn't possibly do, which is a mad idea, and it results in guilt. And so you enter into a state of guilt. And as the Course says, the separation began as the Son of God accepted guilt into his mind. So you've sort of now made yourself guilty. Because the idea is that if you attack, if you sin, if you really have done it and you've done something wrong, you've caused some harm, you've had power over someone, or you've made something go wrong, you understandably are guilty of that. So the guilt is kind of saying, you did it. It's like, it kind of seems to hinge around sin, where if sin is real and it's true and it's happened, then you are guilty. If sin is not real and it's not true and it has not happened, then you must still be innocent. So to go into guilt, you have to give reality and truth to sin, and believe that sin has happened or attack has happened, it's had real consequences, and you're the one who did it. And then that automatically, logically leads you to the conclusion, very logical, that if you did this, then you are the one who's guilty of doing it. So now you kind of own it, and you sort of say, I did this, and that's a condemnation of yourself. It's like accusing yourself of sin. You've said, you've done this. You've actually really done this. You've done something bad. You've done something wrong. You've hurt God. You've attacked reality. You've defiled yourself. And because of this, you must be guilty. So then you agree that it makes sense that you are guilty if you have done this thing. Because you agree with it, you now are sort of almost siding with the guilt and saying, I accept guilt. Guilt is okay. Guilt is allowed. I will permit guilt into my mind, and I will not defend against it, and I will not oppose it, because I actually agree that I should be guilty. And that leads to a kind of openness to punishment. Because now you're sort of saying, I deserve to be punished, because I don't deserve to be forgiven. So again, it kind of hinges around whether the sin is real or not. If the sin wasn't real, then you don't deserve to be punished, because you haven't done anything. If the sin was real, it suggests that you should be punished. even to the extent of death. The wages of sin is death. So if you are guilty, the guilt is going to say, oh, I believe I should have punishment. I deserve to be punished. I want to be punished. And that will be you telling yourself that you want yourself to be punished for what you have done. And so now you yourself are now threatening yourself with attack. You're saying, because I'm guilty, I deserve to be further attacked as a logical consequence of my guilt. So if I'm guilty, I should be punished, and eventually I should be destroyed because I did do this and I accept it. And this is where a sense of unworthiness comes from. So if you are guilty, you're literally believing that you don't deserve to be forgiven. You don't deserve love. You don't deserve to be let off. You don't deserve to be exonerated or found innocent. You yourself kind of condemn yourself, and you're sort of feeling ashamed of yourself, and you pull it upon yourself and say, I deserve to suffer. I should die. And then you set about making that happen. Sickness is a form of guilt. All forms of sickness, every physical ailment, every symptom, everything that people would say is caused by something other than the mind is really being caused by guilt. And it's a death wish, and it's a desire in your mind that you should suffer. And it's a belief that you are going to make sure that it happens to you. And so it's a choice to say, I want to be sick because I deserve to suffer and die, and I should not be happy. So you set about trying to make sure that you suffer and put sickness in place. And even to the extent where you eventually destroy yourself or appear to kill yourself by experiencing what we call death, which really is a self-inflicted, self-chosen punishment. No matter what form it takes, no matter who seems to do it, no matter what seems to be the cause, it is always self-inflicted. It's a consequence of you believing that you sinned. And you go there just because it makes total logical sense to you. You just sort of reason that I must be guilty, so I should probably be punished, shouldn't I? And you say, yeah, I agree with that. I should suffer because I need 50 lashes of the whip just because of what I've done. And you'll be down on yourself, hating yourself, trying to destroy yourself, becoming suicidal, wanting to die because you believe that you're guilty of some kind of sin that you've committed. And this is why everyone in the world is trying to kill themselves. This is why it's a suicidal planet. This is why there is so much death. This is why there's sickness. This is why there is any kind of sickness or death at all, is because of the guilt in the mind, which is giving all this heavy weight and validity and testimony to the idea that you have sinned, that you somehow have done something very, very bad. You've really done it this time. Something that's irreversible. Now, what we do is we take all the properties of God, such as reality, truth, permanence, changelessness, eternity, validity. You take all the things that you could describe God as, and in our mistakenness, we assign them to things that are not true, things that are illusions, things that are impossible, such as sin. You cannot actually sin because God is invulnerable, God is immortal, God is the cause of you, which means that you cannot attack him. Nothing real can be threatened. So you actually can't sin, and you actually therefore haven't sinned. But you can believe by mistake that you've done so. You can want it to be true, you can desire it to be true, but you can't actually do it. So what we've done is we've just kind of convinced ourselves that we're guilty of something that we haven't done in order to try to give extra story and extra kind of weight to this idea that you have done it, to try to make it seem real, to try to give it the properties of God, to try to sort of confuse God with illusory things and say, sin is real, and sin is true, and sin is permanent, and sin is irreversible, and sin is valid, and sin is causal, and it has power, and will and mind, and it dictates what you are, and all the consequence that comes from that. So by believing in this tiny mad idea that you can possibly ever do anything to offend God, who is absolutely beyond all vulnerability, can never be hurt, can never be killed, can never be damaged, can never even be upset and offended. We've insisted and tried to make true and tried to give all this reality and truth to this false idea, this impossibility that you can sin and that you have actually done so, and because you've done so you are really guilty, and because you're really guilty you really should suffer and be punished and die. And we're just very, very mistaken because we believe something that is completely false, something that is absolutely impossible. And we've believed it anyway, and that's why it's an insane belief, because we believe something that's true that is not true. We are insane to do so. So by giving this idea of sin all this reality and heaviness and possibility and sense of existence, all these properties of God, it has surrounded it with this shield of guilt. And everyone now, our minds have gone into a state of guilt. We're just filled with it. And it's not like the little guilts that you think people have, like, oh, I spilled some coffee on the floor just after the guy got done cleaning the floor, and I feel a little bit guilty about it. That's not enough of a guilt to cause the production of space and time, the making of all sickness and the creation of death. Jesus is really talking about a much bigger scope and extent of an immersion in a false reality, a whole sense of self-loathing and unworthiness and heaviness and fear and feeling like you don't deserve anything and being small and little and hiding and people-pleasing and not being true to yourself and pretending to be something that you're not, and just all this whole ego. So what the Course has said is, without guilt, the ego has no life. Only the ego can feel guilty. So you could sort of say the entire ego thought system is a system of guilt. It's a system that opposes the system of God that says we are all innocent forever. So because the ego is based on this idea of attacking, undermining, overthrowing, usurping God's will, it's the separation between brothers and between you and God and you and yourself requires attack in order to push the two things away, in order to make a gap between you and your brothers. You have to use a kind of a forcefulness that rips and isolates and keeps apart. And that is a form of attack. And that must induce guilt. Because if you have attacked, you're guilty of attacking, you have caused harm. And if you've caused harm to someone who supposedly is innocent and pure and holy, emotionally you're going to feel guilty. It's a natural consequence. It makes sense that you should feel guilty if you have attacked the innocent. Because obviously they would appear to have no guilt because of their innocence, and the spotlight's on you, and you're the one that did all this. And so you did it to them, they didn't do it to you because of this separation thing, and now you are guilty of it. So every time there's an attack, which is an attempt to separate, it produces this pit of hell that's filled with guilt. And it's just this horrible, dark, heavy, confused, lost, alone, self-hating, self-destructive, suicidal, wanting to be dead thing. It's like a huge anchor in your whole life. This huge guilt that everybody has, and everybody's ignoring and thinking it's not even important and it's not there, while simultaneously taking steps to disown it and project it onto others and pretend that it doesn't belong to you. So the ego, which is full of guilt and guilt-making, which is the opposite of forgiveness, is an attempt to give sinfulness to give condemnation, to make someone wrong, to make them evil, to portray them as this broken, decrepit, evil, monstrous, doesn't deserve anything blob. we try to frame other people as being super guilty and bad to hide from the fact that we have initially attacked ourselves and believe that we are super guilty and bad, and we've denied it, we've repressed it, we've shut it out of our awareness, we're hiding from it, we don't even seem to know it's there, and so we just sort of act as though, I don't feel guilty, I feel fine, I'm not guilty at all. And yet, when someone comes along offering an opportunity to scapegoat, out comes the guilt. Let's make them guilty. Let's push all of my guilt onto them. Let's attack them, make them guilty. I want them to be the guilty one. They're the one that should die, because then if they can be blamed for all the guilt that's in me, that is my guilt, I can be exonerated and escape from the seeming consequences and get away with it. And now I can find myself to be innocent. And so now I can put on the face of innocence, which covers up the horrendous, monstrous guilt inside my mind, makes me look like I'm harmless and guiltless and innocent and pure and vulnerable and weak, so that it particularly emphasizes the evil, bullshitty, hateful nastiness of someone else, so that I can have this dissociation from my own thing. So I think this is where I'm going to do a little diagram for you to help us visualize what we're actually doing when we're being guilty and when we're projecting. So let's say here is a piece of paper. Here is your mind. Maybe I can try and do this. Here's your mind. I hope this is going to be the right way around this time. There's you. Very attractive. Little lumpy. This is your mind, the whole of you. Now, Course in Miracles actually says that the earth and heaven are both in your mind, and you maintain the world in your mind with your thoughts, which means your mind is bigger than this universe, and it contains inside of it earth and heaven. Your mind is part of God's mind, and it's part of the kingdom of God, and it's very, very big. It is not the size of a brain. It is not the tininess of a body. Your mind has inside of it all of space and time, and all of your brothers who are simultaneously pretending to be bodies, just like you are. So, within your big mind, here's your body, very attractive, slightly lumpy, and here is various other people's bodies who are also slightly lumpy and lopsided. Now, your mind is containing all this stuff, but you, in your mind, identify with your body, and therefore you kind of isolate yourself and contract yourself down to this body only, as if to say that this is all of your mind, and these things now appear to be outside of your body. So now the body acts as a separation device, like a wall that is separating you off and keeping you a prisoner in your little prison cell, so it keeps everybody else outside of you to make the illusion that they don't share the same existence or the same space or anything with you, or yourself or your identity, the Christ. And so you seem to live inside this little bubble where there's a wall of a body that cuts you off from everybody else's bodies. And yet, all of this is happening in your mind, your big mind. So this little you that you think is you, that like this body, now seems to have inside of it a rather small mind. In here, which peers out upon the world and thinks that it's outside of itself, and that the body acts as a wall of separation that is dividing you off from other people. And the stuff that's inside the body, you think, this is me, and this is all the control that I have, and this is the scope of my being, this is the extent of my feelings, this is where I stop. And everything out there beyond the surface of the body is everybody else and their stuff and their separateness. separated by bodies. But this is all bullshit. So let's say here's your mind, very attractive, slightly lumpy, and within your mind you have kind of split your mind. You've kind of tried to separate from yourself. Let's say this is your big mind, and some of your brothers are over here. And you think of yourself as over here, and there's a separation between you. But if this is your mind, then this splitting, or this sort of dividing off and isolating and not sharing and excluding and dissociating is actually happening inside your mind. So your mind is becoming split into two pieces. And this happens, this is the separation. It's happening inside your mind, inside the big mind, between you and your brothers, between you and God, who is even bigger. You're splitting yourself whenever you attack, whenever you're accusing of sin. Very attractive. Now, let's talk about you as if you are within your body. You are just seeming to be the cut off, only you mind that seems to be in your brain or whatever. Okay, this is you on a daily basis. Very attractive and lumpy. Now, so this is Paul. Paul's body mind. Other people are over here somewhere. Let's put them over here somewhere. And this is the perimeter of my body that keeps them outside. In my mind, if I in any way believe in separation or sin or attack, or I try in any way to be special or selfish or in any way other than God created me, I actually am going to make myself very guilty. So now there's guilt in my mind. It's intolerable to have this guilt in your mind and be aware of it, because you've given it so much reality and so much truth that it's horrifying. So the ego that's in here, which is the guilt, let's say, the ego is made of this guilty way of looking at things. It suggests that the way to get free of this guilt isn't to undo the guilt, but is to project it out of the mind onto someone else. Now, if this is your mind and these are your guilty ego thoughts, they cannot exist without the mind. The mind is supporting them, the mind is producing them, the mind is having the belief. You can't actually get the guilt outside of the mind. Ideas leave not their source. ideas and thoughts and beliefs have to depend on a mind. They can't leave it. They can't exist beyond the edges of the mind. They have to stay inside it. But the ego doesn't tell you that, and it pretends it's not true. So what it says is, you can get this guilt out of your mind if you will project it onto someone else. So it says, hey, send your guilt over to those motherfuckers. They can be where the guilt is. We can put the guilt over here, and they can be the guilty ones. This becomes the face of innocence, which hides the guilt here and pretends it's not there. And now you project the guilt onto other people. And the way that you do that is through anger or attack. And if there's room here, but the anger hurls the guilt out. And the purpose of anger is to try to make someone guilty. It isn't really anger because they're guilty. It's not anger that they have sinned. It is actually an attempt to force them to be guilty, to give them guilt, to put your guilt and move it and dislodge it and displace it and associate it with someone that seems to be outside of the boundaries of yourself. So you're now saying, these people over here are where the guilt is. It's associated with them. It's disassociated from me. It's outside of my body limits, the extent of my mind. And therefore I've disowned it, and someone else can take possession of it. And if the way that it transfers or seems to move away from me towards someone else is through attack and anger. So the anger is an attempt to make someone guilty. It's that sort of, you did this wrong and it's your fault and you're the one that did this, and all this kind of forcing, trying to give extra heaviness and condemnation and weight, throwing all the attention onto this other person and trying to frame them as this evil, monstrous, guilty person, this bad person. Meanwhile, as all your focus is hurling towards them, it's taken all the attention away from you. And so you, in this scenario of projection, form the face of innocence, and you come off as being not the guilty one. And so you believe, at least in the ego's way of looking at this process, you believe this actually works. And you think that this is a good strategy and that you can get away with it because of this separation between you and these other minds, you and your brothers. You'd think that there's this kind of a gap here which, when the guilt crosses the gap onto the other side, it leaves this side and it goes over there, and now you're protected by this separateness, this gap between you that is forced to be wider by your guilt, by your angry attack. This distancing, which is space-time, opens up this gap here, and the more you can hate someone, the more you feel you want nothing to do with them, the bigger the separation grows, the deeper the pits of hell, and the more you feel less identified with your guilt, because now the more contrast you can produce between these two sides increases the sense of separateness. If you can say, this is really 100% yours, you are 100% guilty, you little shits, then this becomes the darkness and this becomes the light, and now the more strongly you can separate the two off, the more dissociated you become, the more blinded you are to being the guilty one, the more you don't believe that you have any guilt at all, and it's entirely theirs, and they're the guilty one and not you. This can get pretty extreme. So the more extreme it gets, the angrier you become, the more you hate. The more vicious you become, the more you blame, the more you project this guilt and you find people to be guilty, you are increasing the rift of the separation between you and your holy brothers, and between you and yourself, and between you and God. You are making yourself more mentally ill because of what I'm about to show you. All of this process where you're attacking this side, and you're hiding in this side, and you're creating an illusion of separateness here, and you're emphasizing and increasing the guilt over here. This is actually all happening in your mind only. Because this is your mind. This whole drama takes place inside you, and it does not really involve other people. It does not really entail a real separation as a body. You see, because if you are identifying that you are this piece here, and this other area of mind that houses guilt, that you have said this is not in me, therefore it's outside of me, and you have this sense of it being externalized, because of the body acting as a separation device, you will very easily believe that the guilt is outside the body. And you'll actually think of this as the perimeter of yourself, and anything outside that is not in you, and it's not in your body. So as you project the guilt onto other people through anger, you actually are believing that it's going outside of your mind and outside of your body. And it's cut off by the body. The body is separating you from the guilt. And you actually now believe that it's outside of your body. But it's a deception, because it doesn't actually go outside your body. You believe it does. You perceive that it does. You experience it as though the guilt and the blame is being hurled at someone, not myself, someone that I am not associated with, someone I'm not joined with, someone I'm separate from. So you, in that delusion, you become so blinded by this denial that you deny that you're the guilty one, and therefore you project and displace and dissociate the guilt onto something that seems to be someone not yourself. But this is all happening inside of you. This is all inside your mind. And you could say that the truth is that other people are actually over here, beyond the scope of what you're doing. All of this is self-attack, because all of this is happening in your mind. You're a part of your mind that is attacking another part of your mind, splitting your mind in two, increasing a gap of space and time in your mind, increasing and emphasizing and perpetuating the separation in your mind. It's very convincing that you're not doing this to yourself, because if you do this, your whole sense of identity shifts away from this wholeness and withdraws and isolates into just this half of a mind, the part that seems to be in here. And the part that seems to be out there, you have managed to dissociate, and you believe that everything outside the body is not part of you, even though the world is inside your mind, even though you maintain the world in your mind with your thoughts. So there's kind of like two levels here, sort of. There's you believing that all of this is outside your body, and then there's the fact that all of this is inside of your body, in a sense. So when you get angry, you're already in guilt because you've already accused yourself of being guilty. So now you're trying to get rid of it. You're looking for a scapegoat. You want some way to disown the guilt. You outside of you, seemingly in the world, there seem to be other separate people, bodies, doing stuff. The world of bodies is the world of sin, for only if there were bodies is sin possible. And so these body people, they start doing their business, and you start to find that some of the things they do are evil. You accuse it of being sinful in your estimation, in your judgment, the meaning that you've given to it. You decide that's not okay, this is bad and wrong, and these other things are good. And so what you've just done is sinful. And so now you start pointing a finger and you're saying, you just killed someone's cat, that's a sin, and you just ran over an old lady, that's a sin, and you just smeared dog's poop on someone's trouser leg, that's a sin, and you just stole this person's lunch, that's a sin. And so now these people that really have nothing to do with any of this, that are not part of your guilt, these innocent brothers are doing their business, and through the meaning that you give and project onto the world and the judgments of it that you have in trying to determine what it is and what it means, the valuing of it and so on, the use of it, you identify that this particular thing is a sin, and you say, this person all by themselves, without any contribution from me, has sinned. What they're doing is wrong. And it's not wrong because I say it's wrong, it's just fundamentally evil. So maybe this person's committing a murder, and you believe that this is fundamentally wrong, nobody should ever be doing it, therefore, all by themselves, separate from you, they have sinned. And so they mess up, they do something wrong. This now becomes a wonderful opportunity for your ego, because now it says, oh look, someone messed up. This is a great time that I can now get rid of some of my guilt. I can secretly now take a lump of my guilt, and as I point out the sin that they've committed, I can sort of mix in a bit of my own guilt with the accusation. And because they have actually been the one who's done this thing, they deserve it. and it's justified. And so I'm justified in being angry. I should be angry because of what they've done. And so I'm going to find them to be guilty. And that doesn't mean they are guilty. It means I want them to be guilty. I want to give my guilt to them. I want to give guilt to them and put guilt onto them and make them guilty. Turn them into guilt. I want the guilt to go over there. So then you get into this projecting of your guilt through the denial that you're guilty, the guilty one, picking out this person who seems to be sinning, who is acting as a trigger or doing something that you decide is worthy of scapegoating, and you start splitting your own mind under the belief that you are not splitting your own mind, seeing yourself as body identified and separated off by this wall of flesh, and that your guilt is moving outside your body and is now attaching itself to these people who have moved from being outside your mind seemingly to inside, which now seems to be outside of your mind. And so you're now trying to associate your guilt with these bastards. And now you're pointing a finger and saying, you're wrong and you're bad and you're guilty and you're evil and you suck and I hate you, which increases the sense of separation from these people. You want nothing to do with them. The people that you hate and the people that you despise and the people you have grudges against, and the sense of vicious, murderous dislike. It's a very separating thing, and it makes you despise them so much that you feel like you don't want anything to do with them. You're disgusted by them. You don't want to be around them. You don't want to be near them. You want to be as far away from them as possible, as separate from them, as distant from them as possible. I want the maximum distance, the maximum space-time between us, just to make a huge rift and a gap of the pits of hell between us, to make sure that I am not affected by your bullshit. So the bigger the gap, the more I am protected from the guilt that's over there. The more that I can split this off and keep the guilt over here by these motherfuckers, the more I can be safe from harm and freed from guilt and exonerated from sin and safe. And so the ego says that if you attack other people with your guilt and give them your guilt, you will feel safer, and your anger will make you feel safer. However, the ego's lying, because anytime that you get into attack, you're sinning. Anytime that you attack, you are trying to hurt, and it produces more guilt over here. So every time that you try to get rid of the guilt by attacking someone else with it, your guilt does not really decrease. It actually increases. The more you attack, the more angry you become, the more guilty you feel. The more that you're getting angry and vicious and hurtful towards someone, the more the guilt increases in you, and you feel even more angry, because you're just vicious cycle of multiplying the guilt over and over drives you nuts. You're becoming really insane. And it becomes kind of murderous and very vengeful and hurtful, not just to the other person, but also to you. Because what you don't realize, and what the ego is hiding from you, is that all of this is still taking place only inside your mind. So as you believe, I'm getting angry at this person and they're the one who's guilty and they're receiving the guilt and it's not me and I'm safe from it. Your mind is splitting in half. Inside your mind, and let's say pretending that this is in your head, inside your mind, every time that you attack in anger, your own mind is separating from itself. It is splitting. This is the split mind. Every time that you try to project guilt, to disown the guilt or to deny the guilt, you split your own mind. It hurts your mind when you do this. Your mind becomes unequalized. So now within your own mind, which is attractive and slightly lumpy, the persona in your mind, which is this face of innocence, which tries to side with all of the things that seem to portray you as innocent, that make you seem like a people pleaser and pleasant and attractive looking and thinking well of yourself and illusions of happiness and fake love and so on, produces this seeming identity inside your mind of this persona, which actually is attacking the mind and is saying, these other things, the shadow, the persona part of the mind, the ego, is saying, the mind is not acceptable. Some of it is evil, some of it is wrong, some of it's guilty, and therefore I'm going to attack it and try to destroy it and get rid of it and hide it and dissociate from it. So the persona splits the mind by attacking the rest of the mind, trying to throw the guilt from the mind into this other part of the mind, what we're calling the shadow and the darkness, or like hiding in the shadows, dissociated and hidden behind denial and projection. So the part that you retain as a sense of identity, that you say, this is me inside my body, is this persona self that you think is innocent, and this projected self, the guilt self that is in your mind, in here, you perceive as though it is outside the body in the world, and so now the world has been covered up with this veil of shadows, these dark hounds of hell, which it's very easy for you to take this structure of two halves of a mind, and one thinks that it's the whole mind, and project that and say, it's really this, and other people are the guilty ones. So you think this other person is here. You think they are where the guilt is, and it's separated off from you. But this is all inside your mind. So, okay. So what happens is your mind becomes divided against itself and at war with itself. And if we could say it becomes that the two sides are not equal, you have this half over here and you have half over here, and there's a inequality in the middle. They're disjointed and it's a conflict. They're not on the same level. There's a contrast between the two. And it's here that all the sense of the illusion of separateness happens. So your mind itself needs to realize that it is doing this to itself. This is the secret of salvation. So orb. The secret of salvation is that you're doing this to yourself. If this is your mind, and if this is the guilt in your mind, and your attempts to project are not actually successful, and the idea does not leave its source, and you pretend that you're blaming other people, but in secret what's actually happening is the idea cannot get outside your mind. The split between you and others that this emphasizes and amplifies must be in your mind. And now a part of your mind over here is guilty, and a part of your mind over here is attacking this part and is blaming it and is hating it. So this is you hating a part of yourself. All the accusation, all of the name-calling, the blaming, the pointing fingers, all the stuff that you're doing that you think when you do it to another body, that you're doing it to another person and another self that is not you. You are lying to yourself, because even no matter how it seems, even if you're convinced by it, and you will be pretty convinced by it because of the dissociation of the separation hides awareness of this from your mind and makes you believe that it's not there, and that the guilt is only over here, and that this separation puts it outside you. But it doesn't. But it seems like it does, and so you're very convinced that they are guilty and you are not guilty. And so it makes an illusion that you've escaped from your guilt by giving it to somebody else. But you're delusional and you're deceiving yourself, because you're not actually escaping from it, and it's not getting outside your mind, and your mind is attacking itself, which makes you mentally ill, which makes you weakened, which makes you attacking yourself and increases your guilt. It is self-loathing, it is self-destruction, it is suicide. It is you blaming yourself and hating yourself. Okay? Many years ago, there was a person in my life that I blamed for everything and thought that they were the cause of all problems. And I thought that they were guilty, and I didn't like them, and I hated them. Didn't like being around them, didn't want to be near to them, wanted to have as much distance from them as possible. And basically was putting all my guilt onto them and disowning it so much that I really believed that they really were the guilty one. And it wasn't anything I was doing. It wasn't me that was wrong. I didn't cause any of this. And they were doing all this stupid ass stuff that I could find to be the reasons and the things that I could attach the guilt to, and just kept accusing them and blaming them and hating them and pointing a finger, and until one day when I suddenly had this realization that the self that I was attacking, that I thought was them, that I thought was this guilty person, was me. And it was not really outside my mind, it was actually in my mind and part of myself. That I was, in a sense, one with this person, and everything that I'd ever felt about them, I felt about myself. And it was the projecting and the denying and the dissociating that made it seem in my mind that it wasn't targeted at me. And it wasn't about me, and it wasn't any of the things that I did, and it was all about this person But that was the beginning of a very big healing, because it took a long time, many years, to unravel this self-deception, to get to realizing and actually feeling that these feelings that I had about this person, they actually were targeted at myself. And I could feel that. I could feel how I feel this about me. I feel this hate about me, this guilt that I was accusing this person of. I actually feel about myself, and had to heal that and work on that and get rid of that shit, because that was the secret underneath the belief that it was over here, was the gradual realization that it was actually over here in my mind, in myself, an attack upon myself, and had to forgive myself. So let's talk about forgiveness. Forgiveness takes away all guilt. Forgiveness recognizes that you're innocent because sin is impossible. You cannot have sinned because nothing real can be affected, threatened, endangered, harmed, damaged, made sick, or destroyed. Reality is permanent. Everything that's real lives forever. You can never, ever attack anything real. You can only believe that you attack things that are not real. They seem to be attackable because of their unreality. They seem to be changeable because they are not changelessness. So you cannot, in truth, ever sin, which means you cannot be guilty. If you're not guilty, you must still be innocent as God created you. So most people are in the process of hurling the guilt, attaching the guilt to what seems to be other people outside themselves, identifying the guilt with identities that seem to be separate from you, that you believe are not part of yourself because of your split mind. You think that they're separate from you and they're not in you, but they are. So most of the world is very busy with this projecting, this angry, scapegoating, blaming, finger-pointing, denial, lack of responsibility, disowning of self, self-destructiveness, that is constantly trying to put guilt onto other people. So in forgiveness, the first step is realizing that you're even doing this, then realizing that these people are not really the cause of this guilt, that they're not the ones who are being guilty, they're not the ones who are believing in sin, and they're not the ones who you are justified in attacking. To do that, you have to realize that you are actually not really doing it to them. You're doing it to a part of yourself. And that there's, in your scapegoating and your attempt to pin the blame on another separate person, you're actually trying to split off your own mind and put the blame on another part of yourself that you have cut yourself off from and are pretending is a separate person. So you've got to sort of, at some point, realize this isn't taking place outside your mind. It's actually happening within myself. In my mind, my guilt is compelling me to be angry at myself through a fake externalizing anger that isn't really leaving my mind at all. And every time that I project this guilt, I reinforce the separateness in my mind and split my own mind. producing an inequality between myself and myself, which makes a rift and increases my suffering. So I have to get to realizing that the I here, is doing it to the I here that is part of myself. This whole mind, is at a state of war with itself, inside itself, an internal conflict, a lack of peace within itself. All attack is self-attack. Self attacking itself, part of the mind attacking another part of the mind and trying to split it. The separation is occurring between you and yourself. So to forgive, or to atone, or to undo the split mind, to reverse the separation, Jesus says the body, the sense of separation that's in your mind, that seems to be in this mind that's in here, as if inside this body there's a separation, is also taking place between the mind that's in this body and the mind that's outside this body, because if you remember, your mind is bigger than the universe in truth. So the part that seems to be in you, you think of it as this inside your body, and the part of it over here that you keep attacking, you think of it as outside your body. But both of these parts are part of your mind, the whole of your mind that's very big. And so this separation is the separation device of the body. And the split in your mind that increases in its reality and its depth and its seeming truth and its darkness and its symbolism of evil and damage and sickness and death is the body. And the body becomes emphasized and focused on and made more tangible and real by the projecting of guilt in your mind. Even if it seems it's going on to someone else outside the body is a device for separation. The splitting of the mind is the body. So if your mind is the whole size of the universe, and then you put this wall of flesh around the mind that seems to house the piece of the mind inside the body, inside the wall of flesh, the rest of the mind is outside the wall of flesh. It's a two-way wall, and it's a prison wall. So then you think that you're just this piece of it, this half of a mind that's inside the body, and you think that the part that's outside the body is disconnected from the part that's in there, and you think it's not yourself. So everything outside the body you regard as, that's not myself, I don't have any control over it, I don't have any say in it, I can't cause it, I can't change it, I can't do anything to it, I can't make it move, I can't manipulate it. All I can do is operate from in here, move the body wall around a bit, and then that's the limits of my control. And anything outside the body is now regarded as that can't be part of me. It can't be in my mind because it's outside of this body. And that all of my seeming power to do anything or make anything happen stops at the edge of my flesh. And so anything outside the edges of my flesh seems to be not myself. But this is demonstrating that it is part of yourself. And so those body people that seem to be outside your body, your family and your neighbors and whatnot, they appear to be outside of you, the piece of you that's in here, and not yourself. And so at the same time, this body that separates your mind and splits your mind from itself as a self-attack also is separating you from your brothers. So let's think of these as not bodies. If these are spirit beings, and let's say over here is you as a spirit being. Let's do a new diagram. Here's your mind. Here's your rather affectionate head that looks like an alien. This is your mind, seemingly inside your body, and you project and so on, and over here there's some other person who you think is not yourself. There's another body with a mind in it that you think is separate from yours. The bodies are acting like a brick wall, separating you from this other person. So now there's the gap of separation between the two, which is the surface of the bodies. This body here and this body here, and the space between them makes it seem like this is separate from this, and this mind is separate from this mind. And therefore this mind is not part of this mind, and this mind is outside your body. And therefore, if you project your guilt from here, it's going to leave your mind and go over to someone else's mind, and they're going to be guilty for it. But this is all inside of you as well. Your brother and his mind are shared with you in the Christ mind, and you are one. Brother is all brothers. Every mind contains all minds. Going the wrong way here. Here's your mind. Well, let's say here's you. Here's your brother. It was rather longer than you are. Here's your mind. Here's your brother's mind. But they are joined together and they are one mind. Your mind does contain your brother's mind, and your brother's mind contains your mind, and yet there seems to be a way that the two of you are still two distinct entities. You are a whole being, he is a whole being, and yet you share the same wholeness. So when you've got this guilt thing going on, and you're projecting the guilt, and you're splitting, and the split is at the surface of the bodies, it is separating the shared mind and making it seem like you are only over here and your brother is only over here. And instead of realizing that this is your mutual mind that is shared by both of you, this whole thing is you, this whole thing is your brothers, this whole thing is the entire kingdom of God. All the sons of God are contained and shared with you as part of yourself. When you attempt to split your mind or believe in the separation, You are driving a separation between you and all your brothers. And you're forming bodies and believing your brother has a body and believing you have a body. And now you see the bodies instead of seeing your brothers, and you put your guilt stuff that's over here and you try to put it over here. Because this is your whole mind. So you're trying to make your brother be guilty because you believe that he symbolizes the part of your mind that is separate from what's left of you after being separate. So here's you believing you're in a body being a separate self. Here's your brother, which you now believe is also stuck in a body as a separate self. Both of you are part of one mind, and now you're putting your guilt over here on the other side of this separation to try to believe that it's leaving your mind and going over to your brother. But it's still inside of the big mind that houses both of you. So the separation is taking place between brothers and simultaneously between you and yourself, because you are part of your brother. You are one with him. This whole entire sonship, comprising many, 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 many sons of God, is you. The sonship is your soul. We are the kingdom of God. We, the sons of God. The kingdom of heaven is you. You are the whole of creation. You are inclusive of all your brothers and their creations and your creations. It's all inside. It's all shared. So the guilt in your mind that makes you seem as though you're separated off and isolated also cuts you off from your brothers and seems to associate them with your guilt. And the body, your body and their body, seem to act as the physicalized, manifested, imagined illusion of a wall coming between you. Separation device. So as you accuse, as you, seeming to be this separate me, accuse, hurling your guilt by anger, producing a separation gap, putting it on the other side of the separation gap in your brother, you are not only putting your guilt seemingly outside your mind into another mind, but you're not. You're also within your mind, which is big enough to house your brother with yourself and everybody else, bigger than the universe. You're splitting that. You're splitting the sonship, and you're splitting your mind as well. So you get the split within yourself, within your big self. You get split, and you're splitting off from your brothers. And you probably even see in them a splitness that is dividing them in half. And you, like as Jesus says, you don't even see one whole self when you're doing this. You regard your brother as a body. You're not even seeing him, his wholeness. You're focusing on parts of him, and special relationships are relationships with only a partial being. Like you don't even have a whole self to relate with because you're focusing on separateness so much. You see, even if you are thinking that this is a wholeness, this is the whole of you, it isn't. You're not whole unless you include everyone as a part of you. You are inclusive of the entire kingdom of God. All of creation is a part of yourself. You as the Christ, the shared Christ mind, the identity of Christ belongs to you, and it belongs to your brothers and everyone. We are all one. So if you split yourself here, you're splitting everyone. If you attack yourself, you are attacking the whole sonship. If you forgive and you heal this sense of separation by recognizing you're doing this to yourself and to the sonship, no guilt, and you heal this rift and you reunite with your brother in oneness, which means to reunite the other part of your own mind that you were attacking and hating and scapegoating. You literally were targeting yourself, externalized. You heal the rift with yourself by forgiving yourself, which heals the rift between you and your brothers and between you and the sonship. It heals the sonship as well. I am not alone in experiencing the effects of my thoughts. When I am healed, I am not healed alone. If you choose forgiveness and reunion and oneness over guilt, and you recognize your innocence, you are doing it on behalf of the whole sonship. And you are healing everyone when you find yourself to be innocent. Your guiltlessness lifts guilt away from the entire kingdom of God. There are no private thoughts. So, on the matter of how do you forgive, forgiveness is a state of mind in which there is a recognition that there is nothing to forgive because everything is seen as innocent. It is an end goal. It is a state that you get to in which you are not accusing, in which there is no attack, in which you do not find anyone to be guilty. Therefore, there is no need for forgiveness. There is nothing to forgive. That is real forgiveness. It's not the process that you go through to get to the place where you see someone as innocent. It is the end result of having gone through that process and purified your mind to get to the point where you recognize that they are innocent. You're being forgiving because you are not being accusational. You're being forgiving because you are seeing the innocence in yourself and therefore in everyone. This is why it says the innocent forgiveness looks and waits and does nothing, because it's an awareness that you get to when you have overcome all sin and all guilt. The process of trying to get to that state is really a process of purification, and it involves correction and healing and miracles and intervention and catharsis and crying and releasing and trying to unravel this nonsense in your mind, trying to take back your projections. But you must realize that you're not taking back your projection just off of your brother. Your mind needs to realize that it hasn't actually been accusing your brother. It's been accusing itself. All attack is self-attack. You have to realize that you're doing it to yourself. The hurling of guilt towards another person is not leaving your mind, and you're actually putting it onto yourself and pretending that you're not So it seems like it's to do with another person, but it isn't. So lifting that away from the other person is the recognition that you're not really accusing them. You've actually been accusing yourself, hurting yourself, having sort of an internal split which has produced vengeance toward yourself, an anger that you thought was towards another person, but it was actually towards you. And so every time that you become angry, you're angry at yourself, but you're pretending that you're angry at another person, at someone who is not yourself, because you've separated your mind, and now you're attacking this other piece of your mind that you're pretending doesn't belong to you, in a delusion. So secret of salvation, you're doing it to yourself. You have to take responsibility and realize this isn't taking place outside my mind. This is taking place inside of me. I am having the guilt, I'm having the denial and the dissociation, and I'm having the anger towards myself within my mind, and I'm putting guilt onto myself. As the end result of that anger, I'm still finding myself guilty. It doesn't leave me. So that means it's happening all within you. And it's your conflict and your war with yourself, and not with other people. And they're therefore innocent because they're not really even involved in this. It is an inside job where you are hurting your own self. So then to forgive, you have to be willing to have that corrected, just even realizing that you're doing it to yourself is a pretty profound correction, because it undoes the denial and the illusion that you're getting away with it and that it's not affecting you. Once you realize that you are affecting yourself and your projecting is hurting you, and you're scapegoating through anger and guilt, and you're making guilty. Every time you make guilty, you are making you guilty, because it stays inside you. That gives you an incentive not to make guilty, because if you do try to make your brother guilty, believing that you're not making yourself guilty, you make yourself guilty anyway, and you hurt yourself. So you've got to realize, you've got to recognize what you're doing to yourself. Anytime that you project, you are splitting your own mind and hurting yourself and accusing yourself of sin. And it's not to do with other people. So once you realize that you're doing it to yourself, you now have a vested interest. You're like, well, I don't want to hurt myself, do I? I'm not benefiting from this. I'm actually on the wrong end of the stick, and I'm getting the suffering from this. You've got to actually realizing that you are hurting yourself, and realizing that it does hurt. That you do feel more guilty when you do this. It makes you worse. If you can't recognize that your angry attacks hurt yourself, you won't have any reason to stop doing it. But once you do realize that this is happening in your mind, and that every time you're angry, you're hurting yourself, and you can feel how worse you feel when you do it, the guilt that increases, realizing that this projecting and this anger doesn't work. It's a solution that the ego came up with. It told you, hey, you're guilty. If you'll just attack someone else and give them your guilt, you can be free of it. Except for the fact this isn't possible, because you can't get the guilt to go outside of yourself. You can't give it away. So once you realize it doesn't work, you only ever separate yourself, you only ever attacking yourself, every time that you're angry at yourself and you're splitting your mind. That you're hurting yourself when you do this. It naturally gives you the incentive, the desire to not do it, because you can see nobody in their right mind wants to hurt themselves if they could recognize that it does hurt. It's because you believe that you're not hurting yourself that you keep doing it. You think you're getting away with it and that you're escaping the consequences, that you can have cause without effect. But you're not able to escape the consequences of the things you cause. You do it to yourself, and you giving and receiving are one. So whatever you do give, you will receive. There's no escape from it. So when you realize you cannot attack without hurting yourself, you cannot scapegoat without hurting yourself, you cannot blame without making your own guilt bigger, you cannot get angry at someone without harming yourself more. You then will develop a natural desire not to do it, because you can recognize it's insane, it doesn't work. Anytime you do it, it makes you worse. Anytime you do it, you feel worse. Anytime you do it, you split your mind and you become more dissociated and more unhappy, and it's pointless. You've got to get to recognizing why it's pointless and to feel what it feels like when you do it, and realize that you're actually hurting yourself. This isn't really going out there to that person. You're actually hurting yourself. Once you realize that, you will feel like that's not something you want to do. And so you will tend to stop doing it. You'll learn. It took a I'm still learning this, but I've learned it quite well so far. And I'm doing better at not falling for the lie that I can somehow get away with and escape the consequences of projection. Anytime you try to project this separation and the guilt, it just makes your situation worse. So if I'm recognizing it makes me worse off, it makes me unhappier, it makes me guiltier. Anytime I attack, I increase the guilt, and I feel even more attacky. Anytime I'm angry, it hurts myself, and I feel upset, and I'm the one getting the bullshit. Even if I'm convincing myself the other person is the only one who is wrong, and I'm perfectly right, I am not escaping consequences. So if there's no way for me to attack without hurting myself, it takes away all of the attraction of guilt, all of the appeal of attack, all of the belief that you can actually get something or gain something by doing it, that you can come off the other end better off by undergoing this attack, that somehow you can benefit and be, no, if I attack, I'm going to be happier. If I attack, I'm going to be safer. If I attack, I'm going to be exonerated from guilt. If I attack, I'm going to feel good. It doesn't actually work. If you pay attention, it doesn't actually work. And so stopping attacking allows you to stay in the state of forgiveness. Those who would not forgive must judge to justify their failure to forgive. If you leave the state of forgiveness, you enter into justification and judgment, which is attack. The Course says that if you depend on your own judgment, you will always be guilty. Your own judgment will make you guilty because it's narrow and it's wrong. It is always mistaken. It doesn't have all the facts and all the information and all the variables and all the possibilities that the Holy Spirit knows of. So you make mistakes constantly, and you come to false conclusions, and these conclusions hurt you. So anytime you try to go into attack and into guilt making, you are moving away from forgiveness. If you go the other way, therefore, and you recognize the pointlessness of attack, and you stop attacking, and you stop attacking yourself, and you stop making yourself guilty, and you realize in here, I can feel in here that for me it feels like it's sort of in the upper torso, this sort of heavy guilt hanging down. And when I focus on that I don't know what anything means, Holy Spirit, look at this for me, judge it for me, being willing to let go of all concepts and all previous learning in the past, and allowing Him to see for me and to tell me what is true. It shines a light, and that light keeps me in forgiveness and makes me invulnerable and safe, truly safe, and happier, definitely happier, and saner and clearer with it, and it lifts this sense of guilt up, and it lifts it away, and I feel this happiness come out of nowhere, because it actually works. The solution that actually works is to get rid of the guilt, not through projection. If you go about trying to get rid of it through the ego's counseling and its solution, which is to project it and disown it and keep it, it doesn't work. But if you go the Holy Spirit's way, with forgiveness and the recognition of innocence, there is no sin. Sin is not possible. That I have not sinned. I'm not able to sin because nothing real can be threatened. I haven't hurt God. I haven't offended anything real. I've never hurt anything real. So because this is a dream, the space-time is a dream and it's not reality, anything that takes place here is not really happening. Anything that I do, whether it be a seemingly good thing or a bad thing, even if it's a horrible thing, it still is not real. So it's not really a sin, but it is a mistake. I can be very mistaken. I can do things very mistakenly. I can make the mistake of believing that I can get rid of my guilt by blaming people. Or that being angry will make me feel safer if I'm afraid. But these are just mistakes, and mistakes can be corrected without punishment. They're just errors. They're just came to a false conclusion, just decided something by mistake, just didn't understand, didn't have all the facts, didn't know everything. So made a faulty conclusion, made a mistake, and it produced some consequences of suffering by mistake. And this can all be undone by the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit will undo all the consequences of my wrong decision if I will let Him. I choose to let Him by allowing Him to choose for God for me. So, if we really want to be free, we have to get rid of this stupid guilt. And I didn't really realize for a long time. I've focused a lot on fear and sin and bodies and the world. And it wasn't until recently that I really saw in A Course in Miracles that it really contrasts that essentially there are only two states of innocence and guilt. It says that the separation began when the Son of God accepted guilt into his mind. So we just sort of immersed ourselves in this pool of guilt, this guiltiness, this guilt-making system, this unforgiving. And forgiveness, the opposite of forgiveness is to make guilty. And so that now tells me that, the anger and the projection is making guilt, and that's not forgiveness. So if I want forgiveness, I have to not do that. If I want forgiveness, I have to not get angry and not be making guilty. And it's really the guilt that's the problem. The Course says that without guilt, the ego has no life. Without guilt, there's nothing to keep a separated world in place. Space and time require guilt. It says that the guilt in your mind is what gives physical form its seeming sense of solidity and heaviness. The thin veil of illusions that is space-time and planet Earth is not recognized as a transparent veil over the face of Christ only because of the heaviness of guilt in the mind. The guilt blocks and shuts down and isolates and hides, and it gives a sense of darkness and heaviness to the veil of illusions and makes physical matter seem opaque and solid and heavy. Guilt makes the world seem real. Guilt supports space and time. Guilt is the cause of all sickness. Guilt is the demand for punishment and death. All forms of suffering are forms of guilt. Without guilt, you cannot be sick and you cannot die. It's like the whole ego system is a system of unforgiveness, a system of guiltiness, of not being innocent. So if you take away the guilt, it's game over for the ego. Take away the guilt, lift the guilt off yourself, recognize you're innocent and holy, and you are literally saying no to the ego. You're dissolving the ego by getting rid of the guilt. The Course says only the ego can feel guilt. So if there's a feeling of guilt, it's not my true self that feels the guilt. It's the ego feeling the guilt, and I must have associated myself with the body and the ego in order to feel guilty. I must have separated, which means I must have attacked, which has caused the guilt. And sin, which is attack, increases the guilt. We don't realize how much we've made ourselves guilty. We don't realize how much guilt we're carrying around. We don't realize that guilt, every form of sickness is another form of guilt. That even physical death is a form of guilt. That every pain and every sorrow and every unhappiness and every unforgiveness and every grievance, every anger, every upset, every mental illness, it's all different forms of guilt. And without this guilt, there can be no suffering, there can be no death, there can be no sickness, there can be no space-time, there can be no planet Earth, no world, and no separation. Because the guilt is what gives the sin its reality. It's sort of it's the suggestion that sin has happened. The sin was real. You did do it. There's this all sense of unworthiness, not being good enough, not feeling lovable, precisely because you feel guilty. And I don't like describing it as an unconscious guilt, because it's not really unconscious. It's not in the unconscious mind or whatever. It's just buried in your mind. You just don't want to be aware of it. You're disowning it, and you can become aware of it. But if you project it, you will definitely hide it more. If you project it, you will keep the separation going. If you project it, you will split your mind. If you project it, you will go into denial. And it will become unconscious to you. You become unaware of it, that it's in you, because you now believe it's outside. the better that you get at blaming other people and making them wrong and bad and guilty, the more you will appear to be innocent, but will not be innocent. And deep down, you'll feel horribly guilty. And I'm not going to name names, but a few people are coming to mind that do this very strongly. And they're constantly attacking people and constantly being abusive and hurtful and trying to put the guilt onto other people and make them very, very wrong to make themselves feel better. And it really reveals that those people are very guilty, and these people really believe deep down that they don't deserve love, and they constantly are attacking themselves and trying to destroy themselves. And you don't want to be one of those, because that just ends in death and suicide. You've got to find yourself to be innocent. My sinlessness is guaranteed by God. My sinlessness is guaranteed by God. I cannot be guilty because God created me innocent. If I am innocent, Jesus says the most insane thing is the idea that the innocent could attack and become guilty. If you're innocent and you're pure and you're holy, you can't even conceive of attacking. You can't even have a bad thought in your whole life. You're pure and perfect. How could you even do anything sinful if you're innocent? The belief that you have become sinful, you have stopped being innocent, and you've become guilty has to be a lie. There's no way that the innocent children of God could ever stop being innocent. And to believe that we have must be a mistake. We are permanently innocent and holy. And it is the recognition of that that is symbolized in forgiveness. It's accepting the atonement truth that we still are as God created us. We're still innocent and we have never sinned. There is no sin anywhere. There is only innocence. There is no guilt. So we must try to work on undoing our guilt making. Stop making ourselves guilty. Stop attacking ourselves with guilt. Stop reinforcing it by projecting it onto others, and work on trying to find ourselves to be completely innocent, that nothing in the whole universe can prove otherwise. There is nothing you can do in a dream that has any effect on reality, and this world is a dream. So you cannot have ever done anything wrong. You've never sinned. You're still 100% perfectly innocent in God right now. You are not guilty. The Holy Spirit passes the final judgment and says you are not guilty. Every time the Holy Spirit will find you to be not guilty. So as you join with him and share his vision and accept his judgment and unite with God's will, you are reclaiming your perfect innocence and setting yourself free from guilt. Guilt makes you unhappy. Guilt makes you suffer. Guilt makes you sick. Forgiveness of yourself takes away all guilt, and then you are free. I think I'm going to wrap up there, and hope this was helpful. And take a minute to digest and process and find yourself to be innocent and therefore worthy of God's love. Because if you are innocent, God must still love you, because you have not hurt him and you haven't offended him. So you must still be loved. And then receive some love from God in acknowledgement of the fact that you are still the innocent, perfect being that he created. God bless, and hope you're well and have a good time and be happy, and I love you, and goodbye.